Hello and good morning, guys. If I'm audible, please let me know. Good morning, good morning. Right. So, in our previous lecture, we had discussed the politico-religious uprisings. लेकिन notes नहीं दिए थे इसके. So let us begin with this. Then we are going to finish off the anti-colonial uprisings with the feudal revolts, and following that, we'll talk about the Great Revolt of 1857. So can begin by writing point number 1. That लिखो. Throughout the length of colonial rule, a series of uprisings were organized by religious communities against colonial rule under the banner of religion. Full stop. Next point. Superficially, they appear to be religious revolts against a foreign and exploitative regime that had hurt native religious sentiments. Full stop. In the same point, continue. In other words, they seem to be a religious reaction to British colonialism. Full stop. Next point. However, upon closer observation, it becomes clear that in reality the basic grievances underlying these rebellions were of a political or economic nature. Subpoint. The response to these grievances simply happened to be enveloped in religion. Simply happened to be enveloped in religion. Next subpoint. Thus, it would be more accurate to characterize them as politico-religious uprisings. Thus, it would be more accurate to characterize them as politico-religious uprisings and not simply as religious revolts, right? Next main point. The following factors may be attributed to the emergence of this combination, right? That is the conflation of political issues with religious response. The following factors may be attributed to the emergence of this combination. Subpoint number 1. Such uprisings were the norm during the medieval age and had become ingrained in the body politic of India. Full stop. Example, the Mughal period witnessed revolts by the Sikhs, Satnamis, Jats, Rajputs, and Marathas, which were all raised under the banner of religion. Sikhs, Satnamis, Jats, Rajputs, and Marathas, which were all raised under the banner of religion, right? Number 2, next subpoint. The Indian society of the 18th and 19th centuries was deeply attached to religion. Full stop. Thus, religion was an immensely powerful mobilizer. Thus, religion was an immensely powerful mobilizer. In the same subpoint, continue. Moreover, the leadership of these religious communities drew upon their religious authority as the main basis of their power. Full stop. Thus, organizing these rebellions under the umbrella of religious uprising was a natural choice for them. Thus, organizing these rebellions under the umbrella of religious uprisings was a natural choice for them. ठीक है? Is this clear? So first of all, it was in keeping with the Indian tradition of organizing such similar politico-religious uprisings. This tradition had been carrying on at least since the Mughal period. And secondly, that the issue of religion had a deeply emotional appeal among Indians, especially of the 18th and 19th centuries. And the leadership also depended upon their religious authority as the sole claim of their legitimacy. Therefore, they had no other option, no other basis of organizing, right? So these are the reasons why such uprisings were so frequent against British rule. इतना समझ में आया है guys? Clear है इतना? All right. Next लिखो, next main point. Some important politico-religious revolts against British rule are as follows. Number one, Sannyasi rebellion. Sorry, 1770s to 1820s. Bengal. Write down under this. It was organized under the leadership of sannyasis. Within brackets you can write Hindu wandering mendicants. Who mobilized who mobilized the peasantry and zamindars of Bengal against the British. Against the British. Full stop. Next point. Its root causes were as follows. Full stop. सब पॉइंट्स में लिखो 1 2 करके. Number 1, the impoverishment of the Bengal peasantry and old zamindars following the establishment of British rule meant that they were unable to support these sannyasis who were dependent upon their alms, ALMS, who were dependent upon their alms. Their alms, ALMS. Alms मतलब charity होता है, ठीक है. Next, number 2, next sub point. The British considered these sannyasis to be unlawful elements who were extorting money from the populace. Full stop. Thus, they imposed restrictions upon their annual pilgrimages. Causes समझ में आए हैं? ठीक है. नेक्स्ट मेन पॉइंट लिखो. The Sannyasi rebellion took place in several stages over 5 decades before it could be brutally suppressed during the 1820s. ठीक है. Number 2, Fakir Uprising. (1776-77) Bengal. Write down. Following the establishment of British rule, comma, like the sannyasis, like the sannyasis, comma, the fakirs, the fakirs, within brackets, Muslim wandering mendicants, Muslim wandering mendicants, close brackets, also came under immense pressure, also came under immense pressure. Full stop. तो उनकी भी सेम प्रॉब्लम्स थी, ठीक है. नेक्स्ट पॉइंट. thus they organized a massive rebellion with the assistance of local peasants, zamindars, Rajputs, Pathans, and disbanded soldiers of the Nawab's army. Disbanded soldiers of the Nawab's army. ठीक है. Next main point. Their leaders included Majnu Shah and Chirag Shah. Full stop. They set up a parallel state within Bengal and claimed the right to levy taxes. तो इनका एजेंडा क्लियर था क्या कि ब्रिटिश रूल को बंगाल से खत्म करना है और अपना खुद का रूल एस्टैब्लिश करना है. सो दोज पीपल हु वर आस्क्ड टू पे टैक्सेस टू देम वर आल्सो प्रोहिबिटेड फ्रॉम पेइंग टैक्सेस to the British simultaneously. So it was a clear assertion of sovereignty of the fakirs over the people of Bengal and thus disregarding the sovereignty that had been established by the company's authority. ठीक है. So ये हो गया fakir uprising. Next, right, number 3. The Pagal Panthi rebellion. (1825 to 50) Bengal. लिखो. It was a peaceful and tolerant sect. Of Muslims led by Karim Shah, followed by his son Tipu Shah. Full stop. Next point. They borrowed the philosophy of Sufism along with nature worship and The worship of Hindu gods. And the worship of Hindu gods. Full stop. Next point. Under the leadership of Tipu Shah. Under the leadership of Tipu Shah, comma, they organized a peasant uprising in North Bengal against both zamindars and British officials. Number 4, the Parezi Revolt. (1838 to 57) in Bengal. It was an offshoot of Wahhabism established by Haji Shariatullah to purify the practice of Islam in Bengal. ठीक है. Next point. Under the leadership of his son Dudu Mian, the movement became politicized. Resulting in an uprising of Muslim peasants in North Bengal against Hindu zamindars, moneylenders, and the East India Company. Hindu zamindars, moneylenders, and the East India Company. ठीक है. Next main point. During the revolt of 1857, comma, the Farazis entered a coalition with which elements? With the Wahhabis in Bihar and Awadh. ठीक है. Full stop. Generally, they were more organized than other rebels. Than other rebels. ठीक है? So this was the Paresi revolt and was suppressed along with the revolt of 1857. Number 5, Kuka revolt. (1871) Punjab. The Kuka movement also known as the Namdhari movement had emerged as a puritanical movement within Sikhism. Within Sikhism. That aimed to purify the Sikh religious practices and society by removing external influences. ठीक है? नेक्स्ट पॉइंट लिखो. अंडर बाबा राम सिंह the movement became politicized with the objective of restoring the Sikh Empire. With the objective of restoring the Sikh Empire. Full stop. Next point. Notably, the rebellion was peaceful. Characterized by public protests and boycott of British goods, laws, and schools. Full stop. Next point. Ultimately, the uprising was suppressed with the use of ruthless military force. ठीक है? Next one, right, number 6, the Mopla rebellion. (1830s to 1921). कहां पर? केरला. Write down. The Moplas were the descendants of Arab Muslim settlers who had arrived in the Malabar and married local women between the 7th and 9th centuries. The word Mopla thus means son-in-law in Malayalam. In Malayalam. Next point likho. Traditionally, the Moplas constituted the cultivator class of North Malabar. The land ownership structure of this region was as follows. Genmes belonging primarily to the Nambudri Brahmin community, enjoyed hereditary titles on large tracts of arable land. Tracts, TRACTS, large tracts of arable land. Below them were the Kudium, primarily belonging to the Hindu Nair community. Nairs were also the main martial community of Kerala. ठीक है, यानी कि आर्मी वगैरह में यही लोग सबसे ज्यादा थे. To the Hindu, below them were the Kudiyams who belonged to the Hindu Nair community. They oversaw cultivation and managed revenue collection. Full stop. At the bottom were the Moplas, who were Muslim, and the primary producers, Full stop. Thus, next point likho, thus the religious divide overlapped the class divide, and tensions were always present in this relationship. Sub point likho. However, the different classes and communities lived in relative harmony due to a shared linguistic identity, and the custom of interreligious marriages. Full stop. Next sub point. Additionally, the Moplas enjoyed limited ownership rights over the land that they had cultivated for generations. That means they enjoyed security of tenure. They could not be summarily evicted. Okay? So although tensions were always present, क्योंकि ये exploiter class है, ये exploited class है, इनके बीच में जो interests हैं वो clash करेंगे क्योंकि ये producer है और ये consumer है, तो they both want to increase their share of the surplus. So tensions हमेशा exist होते थे, but relative harmony में तो सारी classes और communities रहती थी. Next point लिखो, next main point. The situation changed drastically. Thank you, sir. When Tipu Sultan invaded and annexed the North Malabar in the 1790s. Full stop. Sub point. Eager. Next sub point likho. Eager to cultivate a loyal class among the locals, land ownership was taken away from the Genoese and given to the Moplas. Full stop. This resulted in much resentment and bloodshed between both communities. ठीक है? So the aggrieved party, that is the Genoese, first targeted the Moplas, who they felt had taken away their birthright, and then फिर tit for tat का cycle शुरू हो गया, right? Next point लिखो. हाँ, next main point. Following the defeat of Tipu Sultan, North Malabar was restored to Travancore, and the traditional land structure was revived. Okay? So Genoese were once again declared as the owners of the land. Sub point likho. Additionally, the Moplas also lost their traditional protections and privileges. Traditional protections and privileges. Next point. Next main point. This resulted in a series of communal riots over the entire 19th century. Full stop. Next point. Finally, in 1896, normalcy was restored when, following the suppression of a major riot reforms were introduced to give relief to the Moplas. Full stop. Next main point. However, the dormant communalism of North Malabar was revived in the backdrop of the Khilafat movement and the Moplas led by Ali Musaliar and Varyankunath Kunj Ahmad Haji Varyankunath Kunj Ahmad Haji organized a powerful revolt full stop. The tragedy was that instead of targeting only the British, comma, the Moplas also targeted ordinary Hindus and Christians. ठीक है, next point, next main point. Many prominent scholars, including C.P. Ramaswamy Iyer, he was the Diwan of Travancore. C.P. Ramaswamy Iyer bitterly criticized Mahatma Gandhi for supporting the Khilafat cause and communalizing national politics. ठीक है, so these are some of the prominent politico-religious rebellions, and politico-religious rebellions में एक फायदा होता है, एक बहुत बड़ा नुकसान होता है. फायदा क्या होता है? that these tend to be extremely powerful and popular. ठीक है, क्योंकि रिलीजन की अपील के बेसिस पर कई सारे लोग रिस्पॉन्ड करने के लिए रेडी हो जाते हैं. बट नुकसान क्या होता है? इंडिया इज अ मल्टी डाइवर्स कंट्री. यहाँ पे कोई एक रिलीजियस कम्युनिटी तो है नहीं, तो इट इज नॉट वेरी इजी फॉर द लीडरशिप to channelize the passions of the followers against a particular target. वो masses अपने target खुद से choose कर लेते हैं. So the movement often becomes directionless and destructive. ठीक है? So that is the disadvantage with such rebellions. तो हमने देख लिए हैं tribal uprisings, peasant uprisings, politico-religious uprisings. Now we have to look at the feudal revolts. ठीक है, now 18th century India that is the period from 1700 to 1799. पिक्चर कैसा था इंडिया का पॉलिटिकली स्पीकिंग? पॉलिटिकली क्या क्या हो रहा था? अगर मैप देखो उस जमाने का तो क्या देखने के लिए मिलेगा? The Mughal Empire was shrinking, it was breaking apart, disintegrating. And as the Mughal Empire was breaking apart, a number of new regional kingdoms were emerging. At the same time, the British were able to establish their stronghold in Bengal, and from there, they had started to expand towards the rest of the country, right? And as the central authority of the Mughal rulers declined, which class is going to emerge as more and more powerful? The feudal class, that is the local chiefs, जो जागीरदार हो गए या जमींदार हो गए, they are going to become more and more powerful. Since these are newly formed states, they will depend upon the support of their underlings also. So even in the regional polities, जो feudal elements हैं, they are going to enjoy a great degree of power and privilege, क्योंकि centralization पूरा नहीं हो पाया है इन छोटे states में भी. ठीक, तो we find the picture of political fragmentation, decentralization, and the rise of feudal elements. ठीक है, so 18th century India definitely witnessed the strengthening of feudalism. Now feudals comprised of which section of the population? They were prominent landowners who enjoyed hereditary and titular ownership over their lands. These hereditary titles were conferred upon them by one king or the other, right? At the same time, since the polity was decentralized, these feudal elements played an important role in administration also, not only at the local level where they enjoyed direct authority, but also at the center where they manipulated the machinery to favor themselves. So they enjoyed prominent administrative roles at both local and central level, or in both local and central politics. Now, this class had a great amount of land and the revenue system was decentralized. That means they were having to pay an almost negligible amount of tax towards the center. That means they were able to accumulate and you can say mobilize the bulk of the surplus that was being generated in a particular region. This allowed them to raise powerful armies and construct powerful forts. Okay, so they raised forts and armies, and because They had monopolized the military power, they had monopolized the administrative power, that is justice, law and order, and they had monopolized revenue. Therefore, they were able to assert their autonomy in their particular regions. So the feudal class of the 18th century emerged as a virtually autonomous ruling class. Now, some feudal lords are going to be bigger, some are going to be smaller. Okay? But it was also during the 18th and early 19th century that British imperialism started taking place. And as the British Empire stretched or expanded to a new territory, is it going to respect the autonomy of the indigenous feudal class, or is it going to establish its sole authority? Its sole authority. So, with British imperialism, the feudal class came under more and more pressure. They were, you can say, deprived of their wealth, power, and autonomy. And how is this class going to respond? The only way in which it knows how to respond. They are the political and administrative leaders, rulers of their particular regions, and traditionally they have settled their scores through war, right? In fact, most of them have asserted their autonomy on the basis of successful rebellions. And thus, the natural reaction was rebellion. Clear? Two important examples. The Polygar rebellion and second, the rebellion of Velu Thambi. He was the Diwan of Travancore. ठीक है, ये बताओ पॉलीगार कौन थे? Polygar is the anglicized version of the word Palaigar or Palayakkar, right? विजयनगर पीरियड का हिस्ट्री याद करोगे तो आई हैड टोल्ड यू गाइज अबाउट द नयन कार सिस्टम, बताया था ना? तो उसमें एक 3 लेवल फ्यूडल ऑर्गेनाइजेशन के बारे में हमने बात करी थी. एट द टॉप वर द सीनियर मोस्ट मिलिट्री फ्यूडल ऑफिशियल्स नोन एज द अमर नायकास, जिनको किंग अमरम ग्रांट्स देता था. At the bottom were the village level feudatories known as the ayagars, who were paid by the local village community in the form of permanent feudal grants of land. And in the middle were the palaigars or paliakkars, who were paid by the Amarnayakas in the form of Palayam grants. याद है ना ये? तो ये जो पलाईगार्स थे, ये डेक्कन, स्पेशली सदर्न डेक्कन वाले रीजन में विजयनगर पीरियड से प्रेजेंट थे. They had survived the Mysore kingdom following the downfall of the Vijayanagar Empire and the the reigns of Hyder Ali and Tipu Sultan as well. ठीक है? When did the uprising begin? 1799. This coincided with the fourth Anglo मैसूर वॉर. ठीक है? फोर्थ एंग्लो मैसूर वॉर में क्या हुआ था? किसकी जीत किसकी हार? The British had won, Tipu Sultan had been defeated. The bulk of his territory was annexed by the British, including much of Karnataka, right? जहां पे ये पलाईगार सबसे ज्यादा एक्टिव थे. And are the British going to respect their autonomy and their traditional powers? No. They would be restricted. ठीक है? Much of their property would be brought under the purview of British taxation, जहां पे taxes बहुत high level के रखे जाएंगे. They would also be deprived of their legal and law and order authority, policing authority. They would also be deprived of the right to collect taxes. So they are going to lose their military might, their economic might, and their ruling privileges, their administrative authority. This is going to be resented by the polygars, thus they are going to rebel. The uprising would last for almost 7 years before it would be ruthlessly suppressed. ठीक है? दूसरा rebellion of वेलुथंबी. कौन थे ये? He was the Diwan of Travancore. Now Travancore was a protectorate of the East India Company. ठीक है? In fact, it was the growing conflict between the East India Company and the state of Mysore that had resulted in the third and fourth Anglo-Mysore wars. ठीक है? In fact, Travancore had even assisted the East India Company in defeating Tipu Sultan during the fourth Anglo-Mysore war. However, Travancore was immensely economically attractive to the British. क्यों? क्योंकि यहाँ पे अच्छे पोर्ट्स थे, such as कोचिन एटसेट्रा, एंड क्योंकि यहाँ से स्पाइस ट्रेड बहुत प्रॉफिटेबल होता था, राइट? Travancore also had a cutlery industry, a metalworks industry that the British were also interested in. So the British were interested in creating a more perfect union with Travancore. And आगे जाकर के अगर ब्रिटिश को इस रीजन में कोई चैलेंज कर सकता था, so that was Travancore. So it was important for the British to neutralize Travancore. ठीक है? Now, the rulers of Travancore were depending upon the protection of the East India Company already, but they still maintained a great degree of autonomy. This was not acceptable to the British. The British imposed the subsidiary alliance upon the rulers of Travancore. The Maharaja of Travancore was unable to appreciate the true design behind subsidiary alliance, how it would virtually न्यूट्रलाइज द पावर ऑफ ट्रैवनकोर, देयरफॉर ही एक्सेप्टेड इट। उसको लगा कि मेरे लिए फायदे का सौदा है, तो ब्रिटिश आर गोइंग टू बी रिस्पॉन्सिबल फॉर प्रोटेक्टिंग मी फ्रॉम माय ट्रेडिशनल एनिमीज सच एज द रूलर्स ऑफ तांजोर और द रूलर्स ऑफ हैदराबाद और द मराठास और लेट अस से मैसूर एटसेट्रा, राइट। तो उसने इसको एक्सेप्ट कर लिया। बट शॉर्टली आफ्टर दिस द ट्रू इंटेंशंस ऑफ द ब्रिटिश वर एक्सपोज्ड। The British began interfering in the internal politics of Travancore. तो उसमें नुकसान किसका होगा? जो ट्रैवनकोर का रूलिंग क्लास, that is the king and also his officials. One of the most powerful officials in Travancore at this point of time was the Prime Minister Veluthambi. He entered into a secret alliance with certain other top military officials and openly rebelled against the British presence. तो जो subsidiary force था उसके ऊपर इसने अटैक कर दिया। क्लियर है? आउटकम क्या था? The rebels were defeated. Veluthambi committed suicide. He preferred not to fall into the hands of the British, but British still wanted to make an example out of him. Therefore, उनकी डेड बॉडी को जो ट्रैवनकोर का मेन पैलेस था उसके दरवाजे के बाहर से लटका के रखा कई महीनों तक, राइट। सो दैट इज हाउ दिस रेबेलियन केम टू एन एंड। पैटर्न क्लियर है कि इस तरह के रिवोल्ट्स क्यों हो रहे हैं? बिकॉज द ट्रेडिशनल प्रिविलेजेस एंड पावर्स ऑफ द फ्यूडल क्लास व्हिच हैड बिकम इमेंसली पावरफुल ड्यूरिंग द 18th century were attacked by the British. So it was a natural reaction against this. Clear? So give the heading feudal revolts. Write down 18th century India. 18th century India presented the picture of political fragmentation. Full stop. The Mughal Empire was disintegrating. And regional kingdoms were trying to consolidate their position. Next point. In this scenario, central authority remained weak. Central authority remained weak as both the imperial crown as well as the regional rulers came to depend heavily upon powerful feudatories. Next point. Thus, there was a distinct rise of feudalism. In 18th century India. Full stop. The feudal class exercised influence in the following manner. Subpoints. Number 1, they enjoyed hereditary titles over fertile lands. Number 2, they performed prominent roles in both local as well as central politics. Number 3, they were able to accumulate the bulk of the taxes generated in their regions. And number 4, using this wealth they raised large armies and constructed powerful forts. Next main point likho. In other words, comma, this feudal class emerged as the virtually autonomous ruling class of 18th century India. Okay. Next main point. However, as the British Empire expanded from the second half of the 18th century onwards, comma, the Indian feudal class was gradually deprived of its wealth, power, and autonomy. Full stop. Next point. Thus, the natural reaction of the dispossessed Indian ruling class was rebellion. Was rebellion. ठीक है? Next main point. The two most important feudal revolts against the British. Two most important feudal revolts against the British were as follows. Number one, Polygar Rebellion, 1799 to 1806. To 1806. Write down. Polygars, also known as Palaigars, were the intermediate level feudal chiefs in the Mysore state who had been present since the glory days of the Vijayanagar Empire. ठीक है? Next point. Following the defeat of Tipu Sultan in 1799, the British annexed much of Mysore. And stripped the Polygars of their revenue, military, and administrative powers. Full stop. Next point. Many disgruntled polygars rebelled against the British. But were crushed ruthlessly. ठीक है? ये हो गया पॉलीगार रेबेलियन. नंबर 2, rebellion of Veluthambi. Write down. He was the Diwan of Travancore. And was opposed to the subsidiary alliance treaty that the British had recently imposed upon his state. Upon his state. Subpoint. Why was he upset with it? Write down subpoint number 1. It had substantially increased the financial burden on Travancore. Number 2, the British had started meddling. The British had started meddling in the internal politics. Of Travancore. ठीक है? Next main point. He, along with some top military officials, hatched a conspiracy, H-A-T-C-H-E-D, hatched a conspiracy to forcibly expel the British from Travancore. Full stop. However, the revolt was suppressed with overwhelming military superiority. ठीक है? So this was the rebellion of Diwan Velu Thambi. Now take down a question. Discuss the Indian response to British imperialism in the pre-nationalist phase. 200 words, 15 marks. Second question. Is it correct to argue that the tribal and peasant uprisings against British rule lacked political consciousness. (200 words, 15 marks. तो ये वाला क्वेश्चन तो हम पहले एड्रेस भी कर चुके हैं, बट ओनली इन द कॉन्टेक्स्ट ऑफ ट्राइबल अपराइजिंग्स, राइट? तो आपको दिखाना होगा कि वही वाले आर्ग्यूमेंट्स पेजेंट अपराइजिंग्स में भी अप्लाई होते हैं. दैट कॉलोनियल हिस्टोरियंस क्या बोलते हैं? दैट दीज वर एपॉलिटिकल अपराइजिंग्स. बट जो रिविजनिस्ट हिस्टोरियंस हैं, सच एज ये क्या बोलते हैं, Sumit Sarkar, etc., they argue that political consciousness permeated the whole of these political and tribal and peasant uprisings. Methods में, objectives में, mobilizing tools में, सब में political consciousness visible रहता है. Discuss the Indian response to British imperialism in the pre-nationalist phase. You simply have to give a survey of the 4 different categories of rebellions that took place. कौन-कौन से? The tribal rebellions, peasant rebellions, politico-religious uprisings, and finally the feudal uprisings, right? तो इनका आपको एक ओवरव्यू प्रोवाइड करना होगा. ऑब्वियसली जो इंडिविजुअल अपराइजिंग्स हैं उनके बारे में आप बहुत ज्यादा लिख नहीं सकते हो. इनफैक्ट जो कॉजेज हैं उनको भी आपको बंच टुगेदर करना पड़ेगा, राइट? तो ऐसा तो है नहीं द काइंड ऑफ प्रॉब्लम्स द ट्राइबल्स वर फेसिंग, पेजेंट्स वर नॉट फेसिंग, और दीज रिलीजियस कम्युनिटीज वर नॉट फेसिंग. इनफैक्ट ऑल दीज कॉजेज वर interlinked with each other. The interests of the peasants were harmed, therefore the interests of the religious communities were also harmed. दोनों एक दूसरे से interlinked थे. The tribals were facing the same kind of problems as these other communities were facing. इनका केस थोड़ा अलग हो जाता है, बट आपको यहाँ पे एड्रेस वैसे ही करना होगा कि आप कॉजेस बताओगे, some prominent examples, केवल आपको उनके नाम बताने होंगे, एंड देन फाइनली ब्रिटिश रिस्पॉन्स क्या था, इसका आउटकम और सिग्निफिकेंस क्या है. आउटकम इन अपराइजिंग्स का क्या हुआ हमेशा? दैट दीज वर ब्रूटली सप्रेस्ड एंड ब्रिटिश इंपीरियलिज्म के जो व्हील्स हैं वो आगे बढ़ते गए बिना रुके हुए. लेकिन सिग्निफिकेंस क्या है? दैट दीज वर द प्रीकर्सर्स टू अ वाइडर नेशनलिस्टिक अवेकनिंग. The presence of such frequent revolts and rebellions also showcased the unpopularity of British rule. It was simply a matter of time before Indians realized that जहां-जहां पे British का रूल कॉन्टिनेंट में है वहां पे सेम तरह का एंगर है, सेम तरह का सेंटिमेंट है, and this created the basis for a larger alliance among nationalists of different parts of India. So that is the significance. On that note, we are going to conclude. Is this clear, guys? प्रतीक कौन सी लाइन रिपीट करनी है? सॉरी मेरा मिस हो गया, देख नहीं पाया मैं पहले. Which point do you want me to repeat? मोपला रेबिलियन का लास्ट लाइन. बट वही है ना कि prominent scholars such as C.P. Ramaswamy Iyer have bitterly criticized. Many prominent scholars, including C.P. Ramaswamy Iyer, bitterly criticized Mahatma Gandhi for supporting the Khilafat cause, and communalizing national politics. Many prominent scholars, including C.P. Ramaswamy Iyer, bitterly criticized Mahatma Gandhi for supporting the Khilafat cause, and communalizing national politics. लिख लिया? चलो, गुड. तो ये हो गए the localized anti-colonial revolts, and now we have the Great Revolt of 1857. तो हमें यहाँ पे कवर क्या क्या करना है? फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल दी कॉजेज ऑफ द रिवोल्ट. अब कॉजेज में जो इमीडिएट ट्रिगर था वो क्या था? द इश्यू ऑफ ग्रीस्ड कार्ट्रिजेस. बट वाज दैट द रियल कॉज? नो, वो केवल ट्रिगर था. द रियल कॉजेज वर deep seated in the history of colonial exploitation. In fact, the Great Revolt of 1857 was the result of the pent up frustration of Indians against colonial exploitation, which had many phases. It included economic exploitation, political exploitation, administrative exploitation. There were powerful military causes associated, and socio-cultural resentment caused by British policies in India. ठीक है? तो सबसे पहले तो हमें causes address करने हैं. Then secondly, क्या address करना है? The storm center and leaders of the revolt. तो वो कौन से इंपॉर्टेंट प्लेसेस थे जहां पे रिवोल्ट बहुत ज्यादा पावरफुल था, एंड उसमें वहां पे प्रोमिनेंट लीडर्स कौन कौन थे, राइट? थिर्डली, द स्प्रेड एंड एक्सटेंट ऑफ द रिवोल्ट. तो कौन कौन से एरियाज अफेक्टेड थे, कौन कौन सी क्लासेस इसमें पार्टिसिपेट कर रही थी, व्हाट वाज द लेवल ऑफ एंथुसियाज्म, व्हाट वर द मेथड्स विद व्हिच द डिस्प्लेजर ऑफ इंडियंस अगेंस्ट द ब्रिटिश वाज शोन. Was the rebellion successful or did it fail? फेल हो गया, ब्रिटिश रूल कायम रहा, मेजर चेंजेस आए लेकिन अंग्रेजों का रूल खत्म नहीं हुआ. तो अब क्या डिस्कस करना है हमें? कॉजेज फॉर द फेलियर ऑफ द रिवोल्ट. ठीक है? Now, although the revolt failed in its objective to end British rule in India, it was not a complete failure. In fact, it is regarded as one of the most important watersheds of colonial history of India, right? So it was very consequential. So the consequences of the revolt are important for us to understand how the British changed their strategy towards India, how the British changed their policies towards India in response to the revolt. That becomes important. And final question आता है, how should the revolt be remembered in history? What was the exact nature of the revolt? So Was it simply a mutiny of sepoys? तो केवल सिपाहियों की बगावत थी, or was it a popular revolt? Should it be regarded as a national war of independence, the first war of independence, or was it something else? ठीक है, तो इसके ऊपर एक बहुत लंबा चौड़ा डिबेट एग्जिस्ट करता है, उसके कॉन्टूर्स को हमें समझना होगा, राइट। एंड फाइनली एक क्लियर पिक्चर हमारे सामने इमर्ज होगी रिगार्डिंग द रिवोल्ट ऑफ 1857। तो फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल द कॉजेज ऑफ द रिवोल्ट ऑफ 1857, बट उसके पहले एक छोटा सा इंट्रोडक्शन। राइट, इंट्रोडक्शन में हम किस तरह की चीजें लिख सकते हैं? That this was one of the most significant events in modern Indian history, and it brought about permanent changes in the British strategy towards India. It has also been the attention or the center of attention of much historical scholarship, right? तो इसके ऊपर opinions भी बहुत सारे हैं, and that is understandable given its importance in the history of India's national movement. Now, simplistic understanding के according, the immediate trigger was the issue of greased cartridges. वो issue पता है ना? क्योंकि एनफील्ड राइफल इंट्रोड्यूस किया गया था, उसको लोड करने का तरीका ऐसा था कि जो कार्ट्रिज होता था, गोली और बारूद एक कार्ट्रिज के अंदर आता था, उसको अपने दांत से पेपर का उसका कवर काटना होता था, एंड देन इट हैड टू बी लोडेड, राइट। अब अफवाह ये फैला कि उस कार्ट्रिज के ऊपर जो ग्रीज है, दैट इज मेड अप ऑफ काउ एंड पिग फैट। नाउ काउ इज सेक्रेड टू द हिंदूज, तो नहीं खाते हैं, एंड पिग्स आर हराम फॉर मुस्लिम्स, वो नहीं खाते हैं। So it was hurtful to the religious sentiments of both Hindu and Muslim सिपाहीज और the sepoys, right? तो उन्होंने उसको एक्सेप्ट करने से मना कर दिया। अंग्रेजों ने बहुत लूक वार्म सा इस पे रिस्पॉन्स दिया, ज्यादा अटेंशन पे नहीं किया। दे डिड नॉट रियलाइज कि कितना पावरफुल इशू है, कितना इमोशनल इशू है, राइट। एंड they made a very half-hearted attempt to convince the Indian soldiers कि नहीं, ऐसा कुछ नहीं है, the British do not have any actual design to destroy your religion, right? And जब उन्होंने एक्सेप्ट करने से मना कर दिया तो कई सोल्जर्स को कोर्ट मार्शल किया। इंडियंस बहुत गुस्सा हुए एंड दे rebelled. The rebellion started in Meerut and spread to other parts of India. That is the simplistic understanding. But in reality, the revolt of 1857 was not a spontaneous uprising because of the greased cartridges issue. The revolt of 1857 had always been in the offing, हमेशा कार्ड्स पे रहता था, तो it was almost inevitable, आज नहीं तो कल होना ही होना था। इट इज सिंपली अ मैटर ऑफ कोइंसिडेंस कि 1857 में नई एनफील्ड राइफल इंडिया में इंट्रोड्यूस करी गई, राइट। 1858 में इंट्रोड्यूस करी जाती तो तब होता, 1850 में कर देते तब भी होता। एंड द रीजन वाज that the basic energy, the anger that was responsible for this revolt of 1857, not only among the sepoys but among the general public also, उसके जो बेसिक कॉजेज हैं, दे हैड बीन प्रेजेंट इनहेरेंटली इन द एक्सप्लॉयटेटिव ब्रिटिश रूल। सो the revolt was the result of the anger that had been building up in every section of the population for the 100 years of British rule in India. तो कोई अचानक से होने वाला मामला नहीं था, ठीक है। That is what we should write in the introduction. So लिखो, the revolt of 1857, the revolt of 1857 is often regarded as a watershed of modern Indian history. Full stop. It brought about a permanent shift in the British colonial policy, in the British colonial policy towards India, towards India. Full stop. Next point. Further, the revolt has been a matter of intense historical discussion as different historians from the very beginning, have interpreted its causes, nature, and consequences. As different historians from the very beginning have interpreted its causes, nature, and consequences through different perspectives. मतलब ये है कि इतना ज्यादा इंपॉर्टेंट है कि कई सारे हिस्टोरिकल नैरेटिव्स एग्जिस्ट करते हैं इसके बारे में. नेक्स्ट पॉइंट. Thus it is important to understand the causes behind this uprising. ठीक है. नेक्स्ट हेडिंग दो, causes. Number 1, issue of greased cartridges. Issue of greased cartridges. लिखो. Colonial historians such as L.E.R. Rees, James Outram, and W. Taylor have identified the greased cartridges issue as the single most important cause for the mutiny of sepoys. Full stop. अब इसको मैं एक्सपैंड नहीं कर रहा हूं. ऑल ऑफ यू नो कि ग्रीस कार्टेजेस इशू था क्या. नेक्स्ट पॉइंट लिखो. However, this suggests two important flaws in the colonial understanding. Suggest काट के reveals कर दो. This reveals two important flaws in the colonial understanding. 1 and 2. Number 1. The revolt was a simple sepoy mutiny. क्या ये बोलना सही होगा कि केवल सिपाहियों की बगावत थी? No, the general masses of North India also participated in large numbers. In fact, the participation of the general masses was much higher than the sepoys. तो उसको केवल एक sepoy mutiny की तरह appreciate interpret करना, that was wrong. And issue of grease cartridges किस group को affect कर रहा था? General population को या सिपाहियों को? सिपाहियों को ही केवल, right? So if it was a simple matter issue among sepoys, why did the general masses participate? Okay, so issue of grease cartridges may have emerged as a trigger, but it was not the real cause. It may explain why the sepoys rebelled, but not why the general people of India rebelled. ठीक है, तो सबसे पहला क्या लिखा है? The revolt was a simple sepoy mutiny. And second, the mutiny was spontaneous and unexpected. Was spontaneous and unexpected. ठीक है, कि अचानक से ग्रीस कार्ट्रिजेस का इश्यू इमर्ज हुआ और उसकी वजह से बगावत हो गई. अदरवाइज कोई रियल रीजन था नहीं. दैट इज व्हाट दे आर ट्राइंग टू सजेस्ट. ये अचानक से अपराइजिंग हुआ. क्लियर? नेक्स्ट पॉइंट लिखो. नेक्स्ट मेन पॉइंट. ऑन द अदर हैंड, comma, it becomes clear that the greased cartridges issue simply acted as the trigger that ignited the gunpowder of resentment that had been accumulating among Indians since the establishment of British rule. ठीक है? Next point. In fact, the revolt was not a spontaneous uprising. Full stop. Deep-seated resentment over economic, political, administrative, military and socio-cultural grievances had made it inevitable. Had made it inevitable. Made it inevitable. ठीक है? It would have happened sooner or later. It would have happened sooner or later. Sooner or later. It would have happened sooner or later. Full stop. The greased cartridges issue. The greased cartridges issue simply ensured that it began as a sepoy mutiny. That it began as a sepoy mutiny. ग्रीस कार्ट्रिजेस का इशू नहीं आता, कोई जरूरी नहीं है कि सिपाहियों से ही शुरुआत होती, शुरुआत कहीं से भी हो सकती थी, लेकिन सिपाही जरूर ज्वाइन करते. ठीक, तो यहाँ पे आपने ग्रीस कार्ट्रिजेस का इशू भी डिस्कस कर लिया है, उसका जो डिबेट है उसके ऊपर भी लाइट थ्रो कर दिया, एंड यू हैव गिवन अ प्रीफेस टू द अदर कॉजेज आल्सो. अदर कॉजेज में पहला नंबर किसका आया था? दी इकोनॉमिक कॉजेज, है ना? तो which group of Indians had suffered economically under British rule? सभी थे, ठीक है, पेजेंट्स भी थे, दी शॉपकीपर्स भी थे, इंडियन मर्चेंट्स एंड बैंकर्स भी थे, फ्यूडल क्लास भी थे, सभी लोग सफर कर रहे थे. इनफैक्ट जो जमींदार थे ओरिजिनल वाले, दे हैड आल्सो सफर्ड. The British policies were also very destructive to the Indians. For example, the land revenue policies, they had ruined the peasantry, they had ruined the original landowners of Bengal, etc. Further, the British policy of deindustrialization had killed the Indian industries. Deindustrialization हुआ था, ruralization हुआ था. The British famine policy was extremely apathetic. The British policy towards the tribals had also resulted in a great degree of resentment. ठीक है, तो economic exploitation was the norm with British rule. Wherever British rule was extended, economic deprivation, deindustrialization, commercialization of agriculture, the marginalization of the peasantry, and the drain of wealth followed. Okay, so this was the general pattern that had developed, and as a result a great degree of resentment had built up among the general people of India. Clear? Write down economic causes करके लिखो. The British policies of direct plunder comma, over taxation, comma, deindustrialization, comma, commercialization of agriculture, and the complete destruction of native commerce, had totally destroyed the balance of the traditional Indian economy, and transformed it into a primarily agrarian and rural economy. A primarily agrarian and rural economy. ठीक है? Next point. British rule had become synonymous with famine, poverty, landlessness, deprivation, bonded labor, and economic dependency. Full stop. Next point. The peasants and artisans were the worst affected. But apart from a small minority of urban merchants, comma, the economic interests of India's traditional zamindars, merchants and bankers had also been hurt. Traditional zamindars, merchants and bankers had also been hurt. तो सबसे खराब हालत तो पेजेंट्स और आर्टिजन्स की हुई, लेकिन जो ट्रेडिशनल जमींदार्स, मर्चेंट्स और बैंकर्स थे, उनकी भी हालत खराब हो गई थी. फायदा केवल बहुत छोटा ग्रुप था अर्बन ड्वेलिंग मर्चेंट्स का, उनको हुआ था, who were in direct trade, who were directly trading with the British East India Company, right? Next point. Thus, British colonial exploitation caused resentment among almost every section of the population. Caused resentment among almost every section of the population. ठीक है, ये हो गए इकोनॉमिक कॉजेज. क्लियर? हाँ जी, सॉरी अबाउट दैट. राइट, तो इकोनॉमिक कॉजेज हमने कवर कर लिए हैं. नेक्स्ट क्या डिस्कस करने हैं? दी political causes. Right? When we are talking about the political causes, we are referring primarily to what? The policy that the British had adopted towards the native rulers of India, the princely rulers, right? तो किस तरह का policy था? Was it an open and equal partnership, or did the British trick the Indian rulers into becoming subservient to them? Trickery use किया, right? Unequal alliances, policy of effective control, policy of ring fence, policy of subsidiary alliance, doctrine of lapse, ये सब लगाया. Awadh was annexed on the pretext of misgovernance. The policy of racial exclusivism was given to argue that Indians are unfit for rule and therefore Indians would be better under British rule. Dalhousie ने ये excuse use करके अवध को annex कर लिया, right? This caused a great degree of suspicion not only among the local rulers but also the people who had become incorporated under British rule. क्योंकि उनके लिए तो contrast बहुत clear था ना. When they were under Indian rulers, they were exploited, but not to the degree that they were exploited under the British rulers. तो Indian rulers का जो rule था, उनको almost contrast में राम राज की तरह दिखता था और British rule रावण राज की तरह दिखता था, right? So that is clear. So it caused a great degree of resentment. Then the British also started depriving the Indian rulers of their traditional privileges, lands, palaces, and even titles. For example, डलहौजी ने मुगल एम्प्रेस जो लास्ट मुगल एम्पर था बहादुर शाह जफर, उसके बाद एक डिक्री कर दिया था कि जो भी नेक्स्ट मुगल एम्पर होगा, दे वुड नॉट बी एबल टू कॉल देमसेल्व्स एम्परर्स, दे वुड सिंपली बी रिफर्ड टू एज प्रिंसेस. The Mughals would also lose the right to their ancestral properties, जैसे कि रेड फोर्ट हो गया आगरा में, या फिर दिल्ली में फतेहपुर सीकरी हो गया, ताजमहल हो गया, वहां पे एक्सेस सब बंद हो जाएगा, ओनरशिप उनका खत्म हो जाएगा, लैप्स हो जाएगा. They would all come under British ownership, right? So these things also took place, and this was a great matter of concern for other Indian rulers who were witnessing these developments. उनको क्लियर दिख रहा था कि आज ये इन रूलर्स के साथ हो रहा है, कल हमारे साथ भी हो सकता है, ठीक है. देयर वाज अ ग्रेट डिग्री ऑफ रिजेंटमेंट. ओके, सो राइट डाउन. द ब्रिटिश adopted deceitful policies towards Indian rulers, such as the policy of ring fence, effective control, subsidiary alliance, and doctrine of lapse. To either impose an unequal alliance upon them, or annex their territory outright. Full stop. Next point. The British policy of imperialism during the industrial phase also caused suspicion among Indian rulers. Next point. The abolition of titles and pensions enjoyed by Indian rulers were perceived as broken promises. The annexation of Awadh on the pretext of misgovernance caused huge resentment among the rulers, talukdars, and ordinary peasants. Full stop. It was seen as a clear betrayal since Awadh had been a friendly British ally since 1765. ठीक है. Next point. The people of the newly annexed regions felt immense resentment due to British economic exploitation, and could easily remember the relatively better times of native rule. ठीक है. Now, ऐसा नहीं है कि इंडिया में कभी फॉरेन रूलर्स ने आकर के इन्वेड किया और अपना रूल एस्टैब्लिश नहीं किया. ठीक है. दैट हैड बीन हैपनिंग सिंस द टाइम ऑफ द आर्यंस और लेट अस से एटलीस्ट द कुशान्स, राइट. बट डिफरेंस क्या था? दैट इंडिया में बाहर से जो भी इन्वेडर आया वो इंडिया में ही बस गया और इंडिया को ही उसने अपना घर बना लिया. दे बिकेम थॉरली इंडियनाइज्ड, चाहे वो कुशान्स हो, चाहे सुल्तान्स हो, चाहे वो मुगल से क्यों ना हो. But British always maintained their alien character, their Western identity. In fact, they owed their allegiance not to India but to Britain. This was one of the major reasons behind the drain of wealth, the constant outflow of resources from India to Britain. So this alien character was not only creating a degree of separation between the rulers and the governed, and the subject population, but it was also causing the material impoverishment of the country. So this foreign and alien character became a major cause of resentment. The Indian population could never associate with the British could never empathize with the Indians. Write down. See, इसमें ही political causes में ही. Next point लिखो. Further, the alien character of British rule alienated Indians from it. Full stop. Unlike previous foreign invaders, the British consciously avoided cultural assimilation with India, with India, rather, full stop, rather, they were more interested in draining India's wealth, in draining India's wealth to Britain, India's wealth to Britain. Thus, full stop करके, thus, British rule permanently appeared as foreign and exploitative to ordinary Indians. To ordinary Indians. Hmm? Thus, the British rule appeared as permanently foreign and exploitative to ordinary Indians. ठीक है एंड लास्ट पॉलिटिकल कॉज है यहाँ पर द इशू ऑफ absentee sovereigntyship. Right. Between 1757 and 1857, who was the real sovereign in India? The East India Company. लेकिन nominal sovereign कौन था? According to all the British laws, the British Crown. Now Indians wanted कि इंडिया में डायरेक्ट ब्रिटिश रूल अगर एस्टैब्लिश हो जाए तो मे बी the grievances of the Indians would be better addressed. They had trust in monarchs rather than British officials. Bureaucrats ज़्यादा monarchs को trust करते थे. That was not happening. Secondly, the British Crown was not only able to outsource the responsibility of governing India, it was also able to outsource all the blame that it was getting for misgoverning India. Right? This was a situation जो कि permanently sustainable नहीं था. Sooner or later, it would have to be resolved. And one of the major causes for this revolt was for ending the company's rule in India and establishing British rule in India. तो ऑल्दो उनका रेबेल्स का स्टेटेड ऑब्जेक्टिव ये नहीं था कि हमको रानी का रूल चाहिए या राजा का रूल चाहिए इंडिया में. They wanted the end of this dual system of government, absentee sovereigntyship, because it was causing a great degree of exploitation. Write down. Absentee sovereigntyship. Absentee sovereigntyship was allowing the British Crown to delegate Indian affairs in the hands of a private company absentee sovereigntyship was allowing the British Crown to delegate Indian affairs in the hands of a private company. This was leading to maladministration and exploitation, causing resentment among Indians. Exploitation, causing resentment among Indians. So economic causes, political causes we have addressed. Now बचे क्या क्या हैं? Administrative causes military causes and socio religious causes. Okay, these we are going to address in tomorrow's class, following which बाकी portions इसके discuss करेंगे हम. That is the storm senders and leaders, spread and extent of the revolt, causes for the failure of the revolt, consequences of the revolt. कोशिश करेंगे कि ये कल की क्लास में हो जाए. नेचर ऑफ द डिबेट नेक्स्ट क्लास में उसके डिस्कस करेंगे. ठीक है, चलिए. एनी डाउट्स? नहीं? ऑनलाइन स्टूडेंट्स, एनी डाउट्स? No doubt? All right then. Okay, I'll see you in tomorrow's lecture then. Thank you for your time.